I come to you as a provider who's been doing this for about, well, last week was my 14th year of chiropractic practice. And we've been in service to San Diego County for that entire time. And we just moved our practice from Bakersfield all the way up to Escondido. And, well, welcome. And it has been a crazy year. And before I say anything, I want you to know, if you are at all inspired about anything I talk about, we are hiring, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that. Those are our Instagram handles. If you jump on our link, like, you can apply there if I do a good enough job, right? But our team has been expanding for the last 3 years, and it's a wild journey because it's also a very inspiring one. Everything that Sharon's talking about, everything that you are talking about, most of us don't know that seeking and chasing and discovering on the outside of us is not where you find it. It's actually within, and it's something we have to remember and uncover. And it's something that I promise you, if you have never been to a chiropractor or have ever been to a vitalistic, holistic healthcare practitioner that actually just isn't trying to diagnose, isn't trying to treat, isn't trying to drug, isn't trying to label, isn't trying to continue the same kind of paradigm of healthcare, but is instead looking for the amazingness that's inside your kid, the strategies and the creativity and the inspiration and the peace of mind and all those things. And a lot of times those are just stuck. And that's a lot of what my talk's going to be about, right? One slide about me. Number 1 point is that I'm a super nerd. Number 2 is that I've spoken on, I think this will be, well, this is North America, so I've spoken here many times. I think I've spoken on 4 continents, always focusing on nervous system, always focusing on reversing chronic challenges. But for the first decade of my practice, we basically stayed in prevention, 100% in wellness and prevention, helping people. We're called future generations because we specialize in prenatal and pediatric chiropractic care. But when you help families start as healthy as possible, you don't end up in the system at all. You can stay radically vibrant, and your system is so self-healing and so self-adapting that you actually never need that healthcare system. And the last one, which gives me a little bit of perspective on the craziness of the world, I'm a West Point grad, I'm a veteran, and I've been deployed, and in the end, if you are a military family, many military families here, I thank you so much for your service. About 1/3 of our practice is military. Okay, this is an example of pre-COVID stressors, right? Pre-COVID stressors, chiropractors always call them the 4 T's: physical traumas, chemical toxins, emotional thoughts, and technology. The all-pervasive technology that's everywhere that we're all addicted to now, and that's by plan, right? And they don't want us, they want our kids, and it drives me nuts. I'm supposed to stay positive, though. I'm going to stay positive. So what is the effect of that? These are pre-COVID statistics. In case you didn't know, 1 in 6 has some sort of learning challenge, all the way down, which the anxiety one I have to sit on for 1 second. 1 in 8 children today has, in 32% of children that are between the age of 13 and 18 have an anxiety disorder right now. That's current. That's not pre-COVID. These are all pre-COVID. And all the way down to the end, that 1 in 4 requires some sort of special education. And if you have a child that's navigating some of this, my heart goes out to you, because my kid, he's wearing glasses. He's 14 months. We found out at 3.5 months that he has the worst eyes any doctor has ever seen at his age. And we've been navigating a lot of that journey alongside you, right? Many of you have kids who are absolutely brilliant and functioning as optimally as possible. I promise you that the arc of conventional healthcare is this, right? What are your symptoms? 10 out of 10, and the goal is 0, right? And we're going to drug you all the way, right? And then at the end, they're like, okay, we're done with you, but we're still not functioning at our best, right? But the arc of optimal health is freaking limitless. And I need you to recognize that. If your kids are well and they're already doing really amazing things, there is no limit to how good their gut is. There's no limit to how good they sleep. There's no good to how peace of mind they have. There's no good to how inspired they are. There's no limit to how optimally well we can be. And I promise you, as modern humans, we have no framework for what optimal is anymore, right? The real consequence is everything is harder, right? Everything is harder. Everybody talks about transitions. So many families coming in with sensory, so many families coming in now still with ADHD and a lot of impulsivity and a lot of distractibility, a lot of that stuff. And Sharon asked me a question on the live yesterday, like, what's the difference, right? How do we get them to a point where that distractibility, that impulsivity, that hyperactivity goes from being a problem and a label and something that a doctor's trying to drug to their strength and their superpower and their creativity and their inspiration and all of that. And that's something that also we're gonna talk about too, if I get to it. This drives me nuts. How many of you ever heard these words before for your kids, right? Not everybody wants to raise their hand. They'll just grow out of it, in my opinion. This is pre-COVID stuff I used to say. This is the worst prognosis that a doctor can say. Usually it's just, I don't really know because we don't really measure and I don't have a solution, so let's wait for next year, right? And all the things that I'm going to talk about today compound in terms of nervous system stress, in terms of compromised adaptability and self-healing and self-regulating, that it's the worst to say just wait until next year. Those are all pre-2020. You guys want to see studies? There's kids in here, right? Okay, I'm surprised that everybody's still sitting. I appreciate it, right? These first few studies, basically what they say is that the last 3 years, which we all know, right, impacted social development, impacted mental health. We were down at the county supervisors talking about the crisis that was coming because a crisis was already here, right, as a result of the statistics that are pre-COVID. And we were telling them what was going to come, and then they said there was a mental health crisis, and we were like, who's taking account for that, right? But these studies show that that what happened, the levels of high stress, the levels of anxiety disorder, depression, and then delays are far beyond. They're not even measuring to the degree that the impact has been yet. We just know it's exponentially higher. This is something that I thought was wild. Like IQ, I don't love IQ, I love EQ and IQ, right? Intelligence quotient, but also your emotional intelligence quotient, the SQ, the social intelligence quotient, those are all very important. If you look at this statistic, after the pandemic, social or IQ scores dropped 22 points. That should be absolutely alarming to everybody. And granted, you're all homeschoolers, right? Or alternative, or at least open to it. I promise you, just by that one decision, you will curve that statistic dramatically. Because we'll talk a little bit about how school creates that. Pandemic babies are facing, so do you guys remember when they did this right here? Let's go to it. You guys remember when they did this? They changed the milestones. And then very quickly, this is actually a very good pediatrician. He's out of LA. He's actually very holistic. I love this guy. He's got a ton of followers. I love everything that he said, but he misunderstands something really important. He didn't understand why crawling was important. And if you don't understand the physicality and the neuromotor foundation of learning that your body and your kids' bodies are, then you're missing a huge part of homeschool, and having that as a big factor and emphasis is a huge thing, which we will talk about. But this, let's go all the way back. This to me was something that I spoke about right away because my daughter at the beginning of everything was 7 months, and she could not verbalize everything that she was experiencing or not experiencing when there was a room full of these over her, like masking her worldview, that I started to do research on facial expressions. And so by 3 months, babies can actually have the visual acuity, not my son, which is very interesting, visual acuity to actually determine whether or not you're speaking lip read enough, their native tongue, or a foreign language. So kids who are bilingual, by 3 months, are already experiencing a world that is so much more dramatically vast, and then we shut it down, right? We are seeing now, oh, what is the effect of the mask, right? We're seeing all the negative side effects. But what is the deficiency? What is the effectiveness and the side effect of the deficiency of seeing the fullest expression of that human face in front of you? No one's taking account for it. At birth, babies not only know mom's face, baby knows every face because that's how far they can see from the breast to the face. And without that, because we have had many people reaching out to me saying, hey, many people saying that they never saw their babies for a whole year, and that nurses were in high-risk environments in hospitals, so they chose to be separate from their baby, but then many people have never shown their newborn, right, their babies, what their face is. And it is a gnarly thing, right? Because nobody talks about what was essential, keyword, of the last 3 years, right? So no wonder we have these speech and social delays, right? Parents are stressed. Any parent in here not stressed? Raise your hand and I need to be in your back pocket, right? Parent perceives stress. Parent perceived stress affects the social and emotional development of the kid. So what is stress, right? I'm not going to go through all these anatomical things, but in the end, what stress does is stress takes you basically between these two dichotomies, right? These two anatomical neurological brain structures. Your prefrontal cortex is the thing that makes us human, right? I got into a debate with a bunch of chiropractors because not all chiropractors are as vocal as me. And they're like, but what's free will really? Are we really, do we have free will? I'm like, you're from Canada. I'm interested in why you're debating this, right? But I said, this is the point, right? The most beneficial research of chiropractic care is that chiropractic adjustments help influence prefrontal cortex function by up to 20%. And that's not published in a chiropractic journal, that's published in a journal called Neuroplasticity, which I'll show you later. But if we're in stress, we downregulate that area of the brain and we go straight to the amygdala. Anybody heard of the amygdala? Everybody knows about the amygdala, right? If you follow all these crazy like self-healing people, they all talk about that part of the brain that drives noradrenaline, that drives your epinephrine, that drives the stress response to the point where we can't have executive function, which is where our prefrontal cortex is. And that is a brain issue, but it also just drives us towards sympathetic dominance, right? The sympathetic nervous system is our gas pedal. It's our fight, flight, stress, survival mode. Our parasympathetic is when we get away from the tiger. Everybody uses saber-tooth tiger, right, as an analogy. Saber-tooth tiger, right? It's like you get away, you run, you fight. Like if it's Rich coming after me, I'm not going to fight. I'm going to run because he's perceived bigger than me, right? But fight or flight is our how we defend ourselves. And if we're stuck on the gas pedal, what does that do to our blood pressure? What does it do to why does it do that? It goes up. It goes up partially, right? Adrenaline. What does it do to our blood sugar? Goes up. We need fuel. What does it do to our blood triglycerides and cholesterol? Goes up. We need fuel and we need wound healing. What does it do to our digestive system? Slows it down. What does it do to our immune system? Yes, it slows it down. What does it do to our learning and memory? Slows it down because we don't need to know math. We don't need to remember fractions. You're laughing? You don't? It's like you don't like math? I'm just joking. So what do you think that is for, say, heart disease? It increases. What does it do for things like diabetes? It increases. What does it do for, say, your ability to defend from a fake schmirus, right? It decreases, right? What does it do to your digestive system? So all these chronic issues that are going up, but what does it do to our kids' learning and memory? And what does it do to their mental resiliency? It plummets. And we are somehow surprised. We're not surprised, right? We knew, our families knew, we just didn't have a framework for it. Why this is important is for us, subluxation, everybody stand up for me. Because you've been sitting for so long, right? Stand up for me.
Try and wrap up at 5 past the hour.
5 past, okay. So everybody slouch, like just hunch over. Right, this is where they want us, right? This is defense posture. And when you're slouching, try to feel absolutely elated. Feel elated while you're slouching over like this, right? Does it feel weird? Like laugh boisterously, like it's really hard, right? Now everybody stand up tall. Everybody stand up tall, get into the best posture that you can feel. And do your best to feel depressed. It's kind of hard not to smile when you stand up like really, really tall. It's really hard not to smile. That is not an accident. That is innate. That is how we're made. That is how we're designed. We are biped humans. We stand on 2 feet. We have a neurostructural alignment coordination system that says if we have good alignment, that we will actually move ourselves away from that stress pattern. And the more we're in that defense posture, the more that we'll actually be primed for prey, right? Go and sit. So this is that same chart of those stressors, but what is this? It's our education system, right? You just Google school and masks, and you see this, right? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures. And that's just a mask thing, right? That's where Sharon, like, I can't celebrate her more for how active she was. Let them breathe, what a catchy phrase. Like, I can't believe how amazing that is. But like, our breath, our very breath is something that she was defending in this smile fest. Like, what a beautiful, beautiful, like, way to communicate, like, something so foundational for humans, not just free humans, but any human at all. But our education system, from this thing to the way that it's structured to, you got some really kind words out of people what the system was meant to create, and then I heard a couple out there that were just like pretty straight. Like, what is the intention of the education system? You know, some people call them other words, and I'm not going to go to that. But this is something that I really want to come back to, because some people don't like milestones. I love milestones. I don't love being shackled to milestones. I don't love saying that by 12 months you must be doing this, and that it's a checkpoint, and it over-sterilizes and over-mechanizes your worldview of your kid. But it's crawl, walk, run for a reason, right? That's not made up. That's just logic, right? And so when they move developmental milestones and they delete some developmental milestones, what they are doing at the root of all of that is they're actually creating a greater landscape where they can normalize dysfunction. If they can normalize the abnormal, get that. In our practice, the Future Gen, we have said for over a decade, normalize normal, normalize normal, normalize normal. And we've said that not because normal is this one thing, but we've said that because we are seeing now how abnormal is just celebrated, right? Something that is completely off from how we were actually immaculately made and designed, and and if you want to get into neurobiologically programmed to have as an expression of human potential. We've normalized the abnormal far more than ever. But crawling not a milestone isn't just, oh, my baby didn't crawl. And if your kid didn't, I apologize. I'm not trying to like marginalize your experience, right? But if you're building a home and that home is your child's optimal function, which includes social learning and all the different things holistically, then not having a milestone is pulling a brick out of that foundation that if we don't see as healthcare providers, or if we are healthcare influencers and we're like, I don't really get it, then you gotta find a new doctor. You gotta find one that is willing to recognize that it's really hard. I don't say this, I say this very politically, right, correct, right, diplomatically. I believe doctors to be, because I have a lot of family members that are in the medical system. I think they're amazing people. I think they're super smart. I think they actually have a lot of compassion and care. I think they're being run by their own system. And oftentimes it's as simple as saying, hey, the complexity of you, Sarah, right, can't be judged by looking through an entire human being through a keyhole, right? That's what reductionist science and reductionist healthcare does. When you reduce people to a symptom, reduce people to a drug, when you reduce people to whatever it is that you're trying to label them with, that inherently can save a lot of lives, which we should be grateful for, but it can very much make you miss the entire mark completely, right? Okay, so what do you think it did to trust for healthcare? This top part, right, where it says the pandemic hasn't changed the levels of trust in healthcare system for most physicians and members of the public. That sounds like positive, right? But when you look at this chart actually shows that a third of humanity, whether you are from the public or you're an actual provider, has decreased trust in healthcare providers, in our healthcare system, right? It's saying, oh, the majority of the people, it hasn't really changed because that middle block, your trust is the same. But how many of you started 2020 with a whole host of trust in the healthcare system? It's crazy, right? That's like 1% of the room. And so if their starting point was already mistrust of the healthcare system, and a third of us have less trust in the healthcare system, that's a factor that nobody's talking about. And this is something that I got to learn a couple weekends ago, because in the end, who's helping? I told Sharon yesterday that I don't want anybody to mistake that if you, mom, right? Dads too, right? Moms, if you don't recognize that you are the best doctor for your family, and if you aren't instilling through your homeschooling education that your kid will eventually be the best version of their own doctor, then we're missing, then you end up being a part of looking for somebody to tell you the health status of your own family, right? The job of every chiropractor or of every doctor, anybody in healthcare, anybody in education, should be your eventual obsolescence. We should be working ourselves out of a job by helping people need us less over time. That is the only sustainable system to education and the only sustainable system to healthcare. Now I'm getting philosophical, right? So this is the complexity of us, right? The Big Dipper. You didn't know that? No, I'm just kidding. And there's like so many slides that I usually go through to get to the end, but this is the end. And most people don't recognize that when you have a challenge, a healthcare challenge, that there's a whole host of understanding, especially when it comes to learning, that you have to have an understanding of. That your healthcare provider should have a framework for how kids develop optimally. How many of you have heard of primitive reflex patterns? Good. Some people have never. Primitive reflex patterns that are in the first year of life that babies should graduate out of, that if you have a child who has some learning challenges, oftentimes OTs and PTs will test to see if there are retained primitive reflexes. They're looking for bricks that have been pulled out of that foundation. But next is movement and touch, which breaks down to fine motor and gross motor. And next is Audio verbal, which breaks down to receptive and expressive language. And next is visual cognition, which moves into oculomotor, eye movement and coordination of the entire system. And if your doctor can't understand the trajectory of normal and how kids may deflect off of normal and have a good framework to bring you back to optimal, then oftentimes that's why families end up in what we call the holistic health trap, right? It's actually just a healthcare trap. So this is something that I love to talk about. This is something that we actually measure in our office. We actually measure brain-body connection. And we measure brain-body connection because you can. And because oftentimes when you do, you can get very specific. After I'm done talking, I'm going to be at my booth and I have a chart that you guys can go home with that actually says which each level of the spine has very key areas that it regulates, that the nervous system regulates through the actual spine. But this says that when you get adjusted, that thermal regulation, temperature regulation along the skin on your spine actually changes. And that isn't just like, oh, I'm not hot or I'm not cold. What it tells you is where the nerves are communicating to the blood vessels where they vasodilate and vasoconstrict. And if they do it in a more balanced way, then those nerves send signals to those specific systems more optimally, right? This is subluxation autonomic balance as it relates to heart rate variability. Anybody heard of heart rate variability? Cool. Be your patient. Heart rate variability is basically measuring your heart rate over time. It's becoming the gold standard in nervous system regulation, which a lot of our students are coming in with parents saying, my kid can't self-regulate very well, and it's not just behavior. It's not just emotions, it's not just social settings, it's digestion, it's immune system, it's all sorts of different functions. And heart rate variability tells us whether or not their system is stuck in that sympathetic dominance or if they're functioning more optimally. And you better believe that we do this regularly and we actually have an objective measurement to not just if your kid's symptoms improve, but if underneath the surface, the root causes of those interferences and those challenges are actually regulating as well. So this is that study. This is Heidi Havik. This is published in the journal Neuroplasticity. And the prefrontal cortex, all the educators, have you guys heard of the prefrontal cortex? Have you guys heard of executive function? You guys have heard, like this, it's literally the seat of human freedom, right? And I'm debating chiropractor, so I'm getting a little like amped. And she spoke to 10,000 neuroscientists. She's a chiropractor. She's also a PhD neuroscientist. And at the end, she basically had a line of people, and they said, let's break down the study. And the only variable was an adjustment. And 2/3 of the room left because they thought it was quackery, and 1/3 stayed, and those have become her global researchers that are multidisciplinary. And it's a beautiful thing because a lot of times in holistic healthcare, we don't like science and we don't like the data, and we kind of love the last 3 years because we're like, look at the data, it sucks, and science is not whatever science is, right? But in the end, if you do it in a way that actually helps empower and it answers a question that many educators are looking for, then you can actually change future generations, right? Okay. Subluxation and fight or flight. This takes you out of fight or flight. Anybody get adjusted? Do you feel like way more stressed after an adjustment? No, right? Like we give our first adjustment, and it's always the moms, right? They get off the table, their face is clearer, their cheeks are glowing. They're like, taller, it's like, I feel taller. I'm like, because you are, right? Like structure and function of the nervous system, when it's stuck here, we shrink, not just in mind and not just in emotional resiliency and not just in our adaptability, but literally in posture, we shrink. And it's crazy. Kids will often, when they get adjusted, they know it. They might get a little louder. They might express a little bit more, but there's always a change, and that change is like a big poop, a big nap, sometimes a big emotion, not always the best emotion, the most convenient emotion at the time, but it's always dramatic change. And it's because they are in touch and in tune with their body more than they ever had been. Is he straight? Good. Some people say yes. Yes, shoulders, but a lot more, right? How many of you saw all of it right away? Good. I like lines, right? When I have a kid in my practice and they're 7, 8, 9, I start teaching their health results and their reports to them. And I teach them because in the end, I usually ask them, is that straight? And they're like, no. I'm like, how do you know? Like, straight line, right? Are you a doctor? And I kind of joke with them because that's the thing, right? We're supposed to be authoritarian. We're supposed to tell them, and I know you don't know. But I tell kids by 7, 8, 9, and I go through their reports with them, because if I can program them in that, like their own sovereignty for their own bodies, then we know that they're going to do better, right? We know that they're going to be better for multiple generations, right? I know I got to finish up soon. This is a group of doctors that we work with. We actually have been part of many practice-based research networks. And so this is chiropractic care plus nutrition plus brain-based stuff, coaching, advice, exercises, games. And this is what we saw as improvements. Phase 1 to 4 is about 3 to 6 months. Some kids was 12. And so in learning outcomes, kids learn better. Their intra and interpersonal skills, their social skills, their sensory outcomes, and their general health outcomes. So I'll end with my kids. Last weekend was the first weekend I left Luca. And literally yesterday I went to vision therapy with him, and his neuro-optometrist told me that he's out of the woods. The system told me, which I could deal with, my wife couldn't, that he was destined for lifetime disabilities, that we needed to prepare to be their patients for life, that he would be a part of their system continually, just debilitated for the rest of his life. And yesterday, Dr. Valenti left the room, and my son jumped out of my arms, crawled out of the room to find him. And he's literally in the hallway looking for him. And Dr. Valenti's like, whoa, what's up, Luca? And last weekend was the first weekend I left him because we've been just working so hard. And this is what happens to providers sometimes, right? You're so often gifted, which is hard for me to say, gifted a kid that pushes you way beyond your understanding of things. If people thought that I was crazy before, I am more crazy now. I'm more committed. I'm more purpose-driven. I'm more inspired. And the people that are getting results in our practice is going to skyrocket as a result of just what we've navigated with my son over the last year. But it's never been about me. And it's never been about you, parents. It's never been about us for me. Everything that I've ever put out there has been for my kids and their friends who are your kids. And if you don't have a home for your kids from a healthcare perspective, I don't care where you are in California. I care that you come to see us because people have they're like, oh, you're too far. And then they're coming back and they're realizing that they went to other great chiropractors that I sent them to, and they just said it's not the same. And it's because not just because we're experts, but we are. And it's not just because we have a great office, but it's because of the commitment we have to loving and serving our community, not only now, but for future generations, is something that I know for a fact no other office can touch with us. I'm grateful. I appreciate you, every one of you, for what you've done is paving the way for my kids to have a better homeschool experience. I am so grateful for you guys and all of your headaches, right? And all your stress, because I know that my kids are going to benefit from it. I appreciate you. Oh, thank you guys. Come see me at the booth.